The book of 2 Kings transports us to one of the most captivating periods in Israel's history. After King Solomon's death, the kingdom split in two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This division set the stage for political and spiritual instability. We're now in the final years of the divided kingdom, as the prophet Elijah is about to leave the scene, and his successor Elisha will step into a central role. It's a time of kings turning away from God, of courageous prophets speaking truth in the face of danger, and of extraordinary miracles revealing God's hand at work amid the chaos. The first 8 chapters of the 2 Kings recount striking events, from Elijah's dramatic departure to Elisha's astonishing miracles. It's as if God was intensifying his presence before the coming storms. Let's dive into this narrative filled with drama, faith, and the ever-present reminder that even in the darkest times, God never abandons his people. After King Ahab's death, his son Ahaziah took the throne of Israel. This new king followed in the sinful footsteps of his parents, worshipping Baal. In chapter 1 of 2 Kings, we learn that Ahaziah suffered a serious accident in the palace. Ahaziah fell through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and was injured. The fall left him bedridden, uncertain if he would survive. Instead of seeking the God of Israel, the king made a decision that revealed his heart. Go and consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, to see if I will recover from this injury. This choice showed that even as king of Israel, he trusted foreign gods more than the true God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to Elijah with a message. Go up and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going off to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore, this is what the Lord says, you will not leave the bed you are lying on, you will surely die. Elijah obeyed and intercepted the messengers. After hearing the prophet's stern message, they returned immediately to the palace. The king was surprised. Why have you returned? Their reply was direct. A man came to meet us and said, go back to the king who sent you and tell him, this is what the Lord says. Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are sending men to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Because of this, you will not leave the bed you are lying on. You will surely die. Curious about who this prophet was, Ahaziah asked, what kind of man was it who came to meet you and told you this? The description was enough. He was a man with a garment of hair and a leather belt around his waist. Immediately the king said, that was Elijah the Tishbite. Instead of repenting, Ahaziah sought to arrest the prophet. He sent a captain with 50 men to capture Elijah. The captain found Elijah sitting on top of a hill and commanded, man of God, the king says, come down. Elijah replied powerfully, if I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Instantly, fire fell from heaven and consumed them. Ahaziah still didn't give up. He sent another captain with 50 more men who met the same terrifying fate. Incredibly, the king sent a third group. This time, the captain acted with wisdom. He approached Elijah and knelt before him, pleading, man of God, please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 servants of yours. The Lord showed mercy. Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him. Elijah went down to the king and delivered the final message. This is what the Lord says, because you have sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, as if there were no God in Israel to consult. You will not leave the bed you are lying on. You will surely die. And so it happened. Ahaziah died, according to the word of the Lord that Elijah had spoken. Since he had no son, his brother Joram became the new king of Israel. Elijah's time on earth was coming to an end, but his departure would be nothing short of extraordinary. Chapter 2 of 2 Kings opens with this announcement. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Knowing what was about to happen, Elijah tried to say goodbye to Elisha. "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." His loyalty revealed the deep bond between them. In Bethel, the company of prophets asked Elisha, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" Elisha answered, "Yes, I know, but do not speak of it." Elijah tried again to go on alone to Jericho and then to the Jordan, but Elisha refused to leave his side. 50 men from the company of the prophets watched from a distance. At the Jordan, Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. Instantly the water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. This miracle echoed the great crossings of Moses and Joshua. On the other side, Elijah asked, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elisha's response showed his spiritual desire. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah replied, "You have asked a difficult thing, yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise it will not." As they walked along, something incredible happened. Suddenly, a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha cried out, "My father! My father! The chariots and horsemen of Israel!" Then he tore his clothes in mourning. As Elijah disappeared, his cloak fell to the ground. Elisha picked it up and returned to the Jordan. There, he struck the water with the cloak and cried, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The waters parted again, and Elisha crossed over. The prophets who had been watching declared, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha." They bowed down before him, acknowledging him as the new prophetic leader. Even after witnessing the ascension, the prophets insisted on searching for Elijah. For 3 days they looked, but as Elisha had said, they found nothing. The Lord had truly taken Elijah to heaven. With Elijah's mantle on his shoulders, Elisha began his own prophetic ministry. His first miracles involved water, an essential element in Israel's dry region. In Jericho, there was a serious problem. The men of the city said to Elisha, "As you can see, this town is well situated, but the water is bad and the land is unproductive." The town's water source was contaminated, leaving the soil barren. Elisha's solution was simple but symbolic. He said, "Bring me a new bowl and put salt in it." When they brought it to him, Elisha went to the spring, threw the salt into it, and declared, "This is what the Lord says, I have purified this water. No more death or unfruitfulness will come from it." The result was immediate and lasting. The waters of Jericho remain pure to this day, according to the word Elisha had spoken. Later, Elisha became involved in a military situation. Joram, king of Israel, along with Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and the king of Edom, marched to fight against Moab, who had rebelled. After 7 days trekking through the desert, they faced a critical issue. The armies and the animals with them had no water. The king of Israel saw this as a bad omen, but Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there no prophet of the Lord here through whom we may inquire?" One officer said Elisha was present. The 3 kings went to Elisha, who initially expressed disdain for the king of Israel. "What do I have to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and your mother." But out of respect for Jehoshaphat, Elisha agreed to help. To prepare to receive the word of the Lord, Elisha asked, "Bring me a harpist." As the harpist played, the hand of the Lord came upon Elisha. He instructed, "Make this valley full of ditches." He explained, "You will not see wind or rain, yet this valley will be filled with water, and you, your livestock, and your animals will drink." He also prophesied victory over Moab. The next morning, water came from the direction of Edom and filled the valley. This miracle saved the armies from thirst and prepared the way for their victory. When the Moabites saw the sun reflecting off the water, it appeared red like blood. Thinking the kings had fought each other, they rushed into the Israelite camp to plunder, only to be defeated by soldiers ready for battle. Elisha's ministry wasn't limited to national affairs. He used his gift to help ordinary people, showing that God cares about small problems just as much as big ones. A widow came to Elisha in a desperate situation. Her husband, one of the prophet's disciples, had died leaving debts. Now the creditor was coming to take her 2 sons as slaves. "Your servant, my husband, is dead," she explained, "and you know that he feared the Lord. But now the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons as slaves." Elisha asked what she had at home. She replied, "Your servant has nothing there at all except a small jar of olive oil." With this humble resource, Elisha saw an opportunity for a miracle. He instructed her, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour oil into all the jars." The widow obeyed. She gathered as many jars as she could and began pouring oil. Miraculously, the oil kept flowing until every jar was full. When she told Elisha, he said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left." The second story involves a wealthy woman from Shunem. Whenever Elisha passed through, she invited him to eat. Realizing he was a holy man of God, she and her husband built a small room for him on their roof. Elisha wanted to do something for her in return. He asked his servant Gehazi, "What can be done for her?" Gehazi observed, "She has no son and her husband is old." In Israel, being childless was a great sorrow. Elisha called the woman and made a promise. "About this time next year, you will hold a son in your arms." Her reaction was disbelief. "No, my lord, man of God, don't mislead your servant." But exactly as Elisha had said, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son the following year. Years later, the boy suddenly fell ill in the fields. "My head, my head." He was carried to his mother, sat on her lap until noon, and then died. The Shunammite woman didn't fall into despair. She laid the boy's body on Elisha's bed and rushed to Mount Carmel to find the prophet. When she found him, she clung to his feet in anguish. Elisha sent Gehazi ahead with his staff to lay it on the boy's face, but nothing happened. When Elisha arrived, he went into the room alone, prayed to the Lord, and lay on the child, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. The boy's body began to warm. Elisha got up, walked around the room, and then bent over the boy again. This time, the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha called the mother, "Take your son." She fell at his feet in gratitude, took her son, and left. Among Elisha's miracles, Naaman's healing stands out. In chapter 5, we meet Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. A successful man with a devastating problem, leprosy, an incurable disease in ancient times. The path to his healing began unexpectedly. A young Israelite girl, captured and serving Naaman's wife, said, "If only my master would see the prophet. In Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." The message reached Naaman, who told the king of Aram. The king sent Naaman to Israel with a letter and expensive gifts: 10 talents of silver, 6,000 gold coins, and 10 sets of fine clothing. The letter read, "With this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." The king of Israel took it as a provocation. "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this man send someone to me to be healed of leprosy?" In anguish, he tore his robes. When Elisha found out, he sent a message: "Why did you tear your clothes? Send the man to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." Naaman arrived at Elisha's house with his impressive entourage. Instead of meeting him personally, Elisha sent a messenger with instructions. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Your skin will be restored and you will be cleansed. Naaman was outraged. I thought he would come out to see me, call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the affected area, and cure me of leprosy. Aren't the Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? His servants wisely advised him. My father, if the prophet had asked you to do something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he simply tells you to wash and be cleansed? Naaman decided to obey. He went down to the Jordan and dipped himself 7 times, as the man of God had instructed. His skin was restored and became as clean as that of a young boy. The healing was complete and instantaneous. Deeply moved, Naaman returned to Elisha to express his gratitude. Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Naaman tried to give Elisha gifts, but the prophet firmly refused. Before leaving, Naaman asked, Please allow me to take with me as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any god but the Lord. He wanted to take Israelite soil with him to build an altar to the God of Israel in his homeland. Elisha was not only a man of personal miracles, he also played a crucial role in Israel's national security. Supernaturally, he knew the enemy's military plans and warned the king. Chapter 6 recounts, the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. This ability repeatedly frustrated the Aramean king's plans. So the king of Israel checked the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again Elisha warned the king. The king of Aram suspected a traitor and asked his officers, Tell me, who among us is on the side of the king of Israel? One of them replied, None of us, my lord the king. But Elisha the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel, the very words you speak in your bedroom. Determined to capture Elisha, the king found out he was in Dothan and sent horses, chariots, and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. The next morning, Elisha's servant saw the army and panicked. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? Elisha's response revealed a profound spiritual truth. Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed, Lord, open his eyes so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the Arameans advanced, Elisha prayed, Strike these people with blindness. And the Lord struck them with blindness. Elisha told them, This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. He led them straight to Samaria, the capital of Israel. Once they arrived, Elisha asked God to open their eyes again. The Aramean soldiers suddenly realized they were in the middle of the enemy's capital, completely vulnerable. The king of Israel asked, Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? Elisha answered mercifully, Do not kill them. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Give them food and water so they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. The outcome of this strategy was stunning. He prepared a great feast for them, and after they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands of Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. But peace didn't last forever. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, laid siege to Samaria. The siege was so severe that it caused a horrific famine in the city. Chapter 6 describes the desperate situation. A donkey's head sold for 80 pieces of silver, and a quarter of a cab of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver. The famine became so extreme that unimaginable acts occurred. As the king of Israel walked along the city wall, a woman cried out to him, "Help me, my lord the king." When he asked her what was wrong, she told a horrifying story. "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son, so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat mine.' So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, 'Give up your son, so we may eat him.' But she had hidden him." Horrified, the king tore his clothes in anguish. Underneath, he was wearing sackcloth, a sign of mourning and repentance the people couldn't see. But instead of turning to God, he blamed Elisha and vowed to kill him. "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha son of Shaphat remains on his shoulders today." While Elisha was at home with the elders of Israel, the king sent a messenger to execute him. But Elisha knew this before the messenger arrived. "Look, that murderer has sent someone to cut off my head. When the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him?" While he was still speaking, the messenger arrived, followed by the king himself, who declared, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" At that crucial moment, Elisha made a surprising promise. "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. By this time tomorrow, at the gate of Samaria, a sea of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel." The king's officer doubted. Even if the Lord opened the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen? Elisha replied, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." That night, something extraordinary happened. 4 lepers living outside the city gates decided to surrender to the Arameans. "If we stay here, we'll die. If we go into the city, we'll die of hunger. Let's surrender to the Aramean army. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, we die." At twilight, they went to the Aramean camp and found it completely deserted. The Lord had caused the Aramean army to hear the sound of chariots, horses, and a great army. So they fled at dusk, abandoning their tents, horses, and donkeys. They fled for their lives. The lepers entered one of the tents and ate and drank, taking silver, gold, and clothes. Then they realized their responsibility. "We're not doing what is right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves." They returned to the city and reported the miraculous flight of the Arameans. The king suspected a trap and sent scouts to investigate. They confirmed that the Arameans had indeed fled, leaving behind clothes and equipment along the road. So, people rushed out and plundered the Aramean camp, and Elisha's prophecy was fulfilled. Food became abundant and cheap once more. And what about the official who had doubted? The king had put him in charge of the gate, but he was trampled to death by the crowd, just as the man of God had foretold. The story of the Shunammite woman didn't end with the resurrection of her son. In chapter 8, we see how God continued to care for her years later. Elisha had warned her, "Leave with your family and go live wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine that will last 7 years." She obeyed and went to live in the land of the Philistines, staying there throughout the 7-year famine. When she returned, she faced a problem. Her house and land had been taken during her absence. Determined to reclaim what was hers, she went to the king to plead for her property. Coincidentally, at that very moment, Gehazi, Elisha's servant, was telling the king about the great miracles his master had performed. He said, "This is the woman, my lord the king, and this is her son, the one Elisha brought back to life." The king asked the woman about it, and she confirmed everything. Amazed by her story and struck by God's care for her, the king made a generous decision. Give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day she left the country until now. Thus, through an extraordinary divine intervention, the woman not only got her property back, but also received all the profits that had been made during the 7 years she was away. What seemed like a financial loss due to obedience to the prophet's word was abundantly restored. This story closes the cycle of miracles connected to the Shunammite woman and shows how God rewards faith and obedience. First, she received a child when she least expected it. Then, the child was restored to life after dying, and finally, her land was restored when it seemed lost forever. At every stage, God showed his faithful care. While Joram, son of Ahab, was reigning in Israel, the prophet Elisha summoned one of the young prophets and gave him a special mission. In 2 Kings chapter 9, we see how Elisha sent the young man with clear instructions. In verses 1 to 3, he said, "Take this flask of oil and go quickly to Ramoth-Gilead. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Go to him, take him aside into an inner room away from his companions. Pour the oil on his head and declare, 'This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel.' Then open the door and run. Don't delay." The young prophet obeyed and set out to complete his mission. When he arrived at Ramoth-Gilead, he found the army commanders gathered. In verse 5, he said, "Commander, I have a message for you." Jehu asked, "For which of us?" And the young man replied, "For you, Commander." Jehu got up, and they went into a private room. There, as verse 6 recounts, the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and declared, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anoint you king over the Lord's people Israel." This anointing wasn't just a political act, it was a divine mission. In verses 7 to 10, the prophet continued, "You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master. I will avenge the blood of my servants the prophets and all the Lord's servants, shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make the house of Ahab like that of Jeroboam son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of land at Jezreel, and no one will bury her." After delivering the message, the young prophet opened the door and fled, just as Elisha had instructed. When Jehu returned to the other commanders, they were curious. In verse 11 they asked, "Is everything all right? What did that madman want with you?" Jehu tried to brush it off. "You know the kind of man and the sort of things he says." But they weren't convinced and pressed him. "That's not true. Tell us what he said." Then in verse 12, Jehu revealed, "He told me, 'This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel.'" The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Verse 13 describes how they responded. They quickly took their cloaks and spread them out on the bare steps in front of Jehu. Then they blew the trumpet and shouted, "Jehu is king!" This spontaneous proclamation confirmed Jehu's authority and set the stage for his revolt against the royal house. Without delay, Jehu mounted his chariot and set out for Jezreel, where King Joram was recovering from wounds sustained. In battle, Jehu's driving style was so distinctive that the watchman in Jezreel recognized it from afar. In verse 20, the watchman reported, "The messenger has reached them, but he isn't coming back. The driving is like that of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a madman." The decisive confrontation happened at the vineyard that had once belonged to Naboth, the man Ahab and Jezebel had ordered killed years before. When Joram met Jehu, he asked, "Do you come in peace, Jehu?" The reply was devastating. In verse 22, Jehu declared, "How can there be peace as long as the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound?" Sensing the danger, Joram tried to flee, shouting to Ahaziah, "Treachery, Ahaziah!" But it was too late. In verse 24, Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he collapsed dead in his chariot. Joram's death was only the beginning of Jehu's vengeance. He ordered that the body be thrown onto the field of Naboth, fulfilling the prophecy that Ahab's family would be punished in that very place. Jehu then pursued and killed Ahaziah, king of Judah, who had come to visit Joram. The most dreadful fate, however, was reserved for Jezebel. When Jehu arrived in Jezreel, Jezebel put on makeup, styled her hair, and looked out the palace window. In verse 30, she taunted him, "How are things, Zimri, murderer of your master?" But Jehu was undeterred. He looked up and shouted, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him, and Jehu commanded, "Throw her down." They threw her, and her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses. After going inside to eat and drink, Jehu gave the order to bury Jezebel, saying in verse 34, "Take care of that cursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." But when they went to bury her, all they found were her skull, her feet, and her hands. The rest had been devoured by dogs, just as the prophet Elijah had foretold years before. With Joram and Jezebel dead, Jehu turned his attention to the rest of Ahab's family. 70 of Ahab's sons were living in Samaria under the care of the city's leaders. In chapter 10, Jehu sent letters to these leaders, challenging them to pick one of Ahab's sons to be king and fight him. In verse 4, we see how terrified the leaders were. 2 kings couldn't stand up to him. How can we? So they sent this reply to Jehu, "We are your servants, and will do whatever you say. We will not appoint anyone as king. Do whatever you think is best." Jehu sent a second letter, demanding proof of loyalty. "If you are on my side and will obey me, bring me the heads of your master's sons by this time tomorrow in Jezreel." The next day, the leaders of Samaria killed all 70 of Ahab's sons and sent their heads in baskets to Jehu in Jezreel. When the heads arrived, Jehu ordered them to be piled in 2 heaps at the city gate until morning. The next day, he addressed the people and said in verse 9, "You are innocent. I conspired against my master and killed him, but who killed all these?" With these cunning words, Jehu made it clear that the prophecy against Ahab's house was being fulfilled. The Lord has done what he promised through his servant Elijah. Jehu didn't stop there. He killed everyone remaining of Ahab's family in Jezreel, including officials, close friends, and priests. He left no survivors, completely fulfilling the prophecy against Ahab's house. But the most cunning part of Jehu's plan was still to come. After securing his power, he made a bold announcement in verse 18. "Ahab served Baal a little, Jehu will serve him much." This seemed to suggest that Jehu would be even more devoted to Baal worship than his predecessor. To demonstrate this supposed devotion, Jehu summoned a great assembly in Baal's honor. "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much more. Call all Baal's prophets, all his ministers, and all his priests. Let no one fail to come, for I am going to offer a great sacrifice to Baal. Whoever fails to come will not live." Verses 19 to 21 show how Jehu, with great cunning, gathered all the Baal worshippers. "Proclaim a solemn assembly in honor of Baal." And they did. Jehu sent messengers throughout Israel, and all Baal worshippers came. None were missing. They filled Baal's temple from one end to the other. Before the ceremony began, Jehu took precautions to ensure that only Baal worshippers were present. In verse 22, he ordered the wardrobe keeper, "Bring robes for all the worshippers of Baal." Once they were all dressed in ritual garments, Jehu and Jonadab, son of Rechab, entered the temple. Jehu warned them in verse 23, "Make sure there are no servants of the Lord among you, only Baal worshippers." This gave any faithful Israelite a chance to escape, but also ensured that only true Baal followers remained. When the sacrifices began, Jehu stationed 80 men outside and instructed them, "If any one of you lets someone escape, you will pay for it with your life." As soon as the offering was done, Jehu gave the order in verse 25, "Go in and kill them. Let no one escape." The soldiers went in and struck them all down with their swords. They then dragged out the sacred pillar from Baal's temple and burned it. They destroyed the sacred stone and demolished the temple itself, turning it into a latrine, a purpose it still served at the time the text was written. Thus, through this bloody cunning, Jehu wiped out Baal worship from Israel. In verse 28 we read, "So Jehu destroyed Baal worship in Israel." While these dramatic events unfolded in the northern kingdom, a different kind of tragedy struck Judah. When Ahaziah, king of Judah, was killed by Jehu, his mother Athaliah saw an opportunity to seize power for herself. In chapter 11, verse 1, we see Athaliah's cruel action. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family. Athaliah was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and the wife of the late King Jehoram of Judah. Now with her son Ahaziah dead, she was determined to eliminate any possible heir to the throne and rule alone. This massacre nearly wiped out the entire royal lineage of David, which would have been a spiritual and historical catastrophe for Israel. But providentially, one courageous person stepped in to save a surviving heir. In verse 2, we see how Jehosheba, sister of Ahaziah and daughter of King Jehoram, but from a different mother than Athaliah, acted swiftly and wisely. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram and sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be killed. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom to hide him from Athaliah, so he was not killed. Joash was just a baby when he was rescued by his aunt Jehosheba, who was married to the high priest Jehoiada. Verse 3 tells us, "He remained hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled the land." For 6 years, Athaliah reigned over Judah, unaware that a rightful heir from the house of David was alive and being sheltered in the temple. She promoted Baal worship in Judah, following the footsteps of her parents, Ahab and Jezebel. A temple to Baal was established in Jerusalem, and the worship of the true God was neglected. This was one of the darkest periods in Judah's history. The Davidic lineage, from which the Messiah would come, hung by a thread, represented only by a hidden child. But God remained faithful to his promise to David, preserving young Joash so that, at the appointed time, he could rightfully take his place on the throne. After 6 years under Athaliah's tyrannical rule, the high priest Jehoiada decided it was time to restore the rightful Davidic line to the throne. In chapter 11, verse 4, we see how carefully he planned the restoration. In the 7th year, Jehoiada sent for the commanders of units of 100, the Carites and the guards, and had them brought to him at the temple of the Lord. He made a covenant with them and put them under oath at the temple of the Lord. Then he showed them the king's son. Jehoiada divided the soldiers into 3 groups. As seen in verses 5 to 8, he gave them detailed instructions. "A third of you who come on duty on the Sabbath are to guard the royal palace, a third at the Sur gate, and a third at the gate behind the guard, who take turns guarding the temple. And you who are in the other 2 companies that normally go off duty on the Sabbath are all to guard the temple for the king. Station yourselves around the king, each of you with weapon in hand. Anyone who approaches your ranks is to be put to death. Stay close to the king wherever he goes." The soldiers were to surround the young king, weapons in hand, ready to kill anyone who tried to harm him. They were to accompany him wherever he went. On the appointed day, the commanders did exactly as Jehoiada had instructed. Verse 9 says, "The commanders of units of 100 did just as Jehoiada the priest ordered. Each one took his men, those who were going on duty on the Sabbath and those who were going off duty, and came to Jehoiada the priest. To properly arm the guards, Jehoiada gave them spears and shields that had belonged to King David and were kept in the temple of the Lord. Verse 11 paints the scene. The guards, each with weapon in hand, stationed themselves around the king, near the altar in the temple, from the south side to the north side of the temple. Then came the solemn moment of coronation. In verse 12 we read, Jehoiada brought out the king's son and put the crown on him. He presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him, and the people clapped their hands and shouted, Long live the king! When Athaliah heard the commotion, she went to the temple to see what was happening. Her horrified reaction is recorded in verse 14. She looked, and there was the king, standing by the pillar, as was the custom. The officers and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her robes and cried out, Treason! Treason! The high priest Jehoiada ordered that Athaliah be taken out of the temple and executed. Verse 16 tells us, So they seized her as she reached the place where the horses enter the palace grounds, and there she was put to death. After Athaliah's execution, Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord, the king, and the people, binding them to be the Lord's people. He also established a covenant between the king and the people. Verse 17 states, Jehoiada then made a covenant between the Lord and the king and people that they would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people. Next, all the people went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They completely destroyed the altars and idols and killed Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Finally, Jehoiada and the people brought King Joash from the temple to the royal palace, escorted by the guards. Joash took his place on the royal throne, and all the people rejoiced. The city was calm because Athaliah had been killed with the sword at the palace. Verse 21 ends this dramatic episode with a simple yet powerful statement. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. A 7-year-old boy now sat on David's throne, preserving the messianic line and restoring true worship in Judah. Returning to the northern kingdom, Jehu received divine commendation for destroying Ahab's dynasty. In chapter 10, verse 30, the Lord said to Jehu, Because you have done well in accomplishing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab all I had in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. This promise was fulfilled, as Jehu's dynasty lasted 5 generations: Jehu, Jehoahaz, Jehoash, Jeroboam II, and Zechariah. However, despite wiping out Baal worship, Jehu was not fully faithful to the Lord. Verse 29 states, Nevertheless, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit, the worship of the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. Jehu got rid of one form of idolatry only to maintain another. The golden calves had been set up by Israel's first king, Jeroboam I, to prevent the people from going to worship in Jerusalem. This idolatry remained the official religion of the northern kingdom throughout its history. Because of this partial faithfulness, the Lord began to diminish Israel's territory. As verse 32 says, In those days, the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel. Hazael overpowered the Israelites throughout their territory. The powerful king of Syria, Hazael, conquered all of Israel's land east of the Jordan River in the regions of Gilead and Bashan. After reigning for 28 years, Jehu died and was succeeded by his son Jehoahaz. Verse 35 says, Jehu rested with his ancestors and was buried in Samaria, and Jehoahaz, his son, succeeded him as king. The reign of Jehoahaz, 817 to 800 BC, was marked by even more military defeats and Syrian oppression. In chapter 13, verse 3, we read, So the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and for a long time he kept them under the power of Hazael king of Aram and Ben-Hadad his son. The situation became so desperate that in verse 7 it says, Nothing was left of the army of Jehoahaz except 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. For the king of Aram had destroyed the rest and made them like the dust at threshing time. In his desperation, Jehoahaz turned to the Lord. In verse 4 we read, "Then Jehoahaz sought the Lord's favor, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel. The Lord, in his mercy, sent a deliverer to Israel, giving them some relief from Syrian oppression after Jehoahaz, his son Joash, 800-784 BC, became king. He continued the idolatrous practices of his predecessors. In verse 11 we read, "He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He continued in them. However, Jehoash did manage to secure some military victories against Syria. Before he died, the prophet Elisha had predicted that Jehoash would defeat the Syrians 3 times. In verses 18 and 19, Elisha instructed Jehoash to take some arrows and strike them on the ground. Jehoash struck the ground 3 times and stopped. Elisha became angry and said, "You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, then you would have defeated Aram completely. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. Indeed, in verse 25 we read, "Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns he had taken in battle from his father Jehoahaz. 3 times Jehoash defeated him, and so he recovered the Israelite towns." After Jehoash, his son Jeroboam II, 793-753 BC, became king. Under his reign, Israel experienced remarkable prosperity and territorial expansion. In chapter 14, verse 25, we read, "He was the one who restored the boundaries of Israel from Lebo-Hamath to the Dead Sea, in accordance with the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, spoken through his servant Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher." This marked the golden age of Jehu's dynasty, during which Israel reclaimed much of its former land and prosperity. However, this prosperity did not bring the people back to the Lord. Idolatry and social injustice flourished, as denounced by the prophets Amos and Hosea, who ministered during this time. Jeroboam II's son, Zechariah, was the last of Jehu's line to reign. His rule lasted only 6 months before he was assassinated by Shallum, fulfilling the Lord's promise that Jehu's descendants would reign to the 4th generation. During the reigns of Jehoahaz and Jehoash, Elisha continued his prophetic ministry, influencing Israel's political affairs and proclaiming the word of the Lord. In chapter 13, verse 14, we see that Elisha was already old and ill. Now Elisha was suffering from the illness from which he died. Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father," he cried, "the chariots and horsemen of Israel." Even on his deathbed, Elisha had one final prophetic message to deliver. He instructed King Jehoash to open the east-facing window towards Syria and shoot an arrow. When the king did so, Elisha declared in verse 17, "The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram. You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek." Then, as already mentioned, Elisha told the king to strike the ground with the arrows. The king struck 3 times and stopped. Elisha became angry with him for stopping, explaining that now he would only defeat Syria 3 times, rather than achieving total victory. Verse 20 records Elisha's death. Elisha died and was buried. But even after his death, God's power continued to manifest through him. A remarkable story is told in verses 20 and 21. Now, Moabite raiders used to enter the country every spring. Once, while some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders, so they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. This posthumous miracle served as a powerful reminder of the divine power that had worked through Elisha during his life. It also symbolized the hope that, even in times of invasion and uncertainty, God's power to bring life remained present in Israel. After the death of Zechariah, the last king from Jehu's dynasty, Israel entered a period of extreme political instability. In about 30 years, 6 kings sat on the throne, most of them rising to power through conspiracies and assassinations. Shallum, son of Jabesh, assassinated Zechariah and seized the throne, but he reigned only 1 month in Samaria. In chapter 15, verse 14, we read, "Then Menahem, son of Gadi, went from Tirzah up to Samaria. He attacked Shallum, son of Jabesh, and killed him in Samaria. Then he succeeded him as king." Menahem ruled for 10 years, 752–742 BC, but his reign was marked by extreme cruelty. When the city of Tifsah refused to open its gates to him, he attacked it and ripped open all the pregnant women. During his reign, Assyria began threatening Israel. In verse 19 we read, "Then Pul, king of Assyria, invaded the land, and Menahem gave him 1,000 talents of silver to secure his support and strengthen his own hold on the kingdom." To raise this massive amount, Menahem imposed a heavy tax of 50 shekels of silver on all the wealthy men in Israel. After Menahem, his son Pekahiah reigned for 2 years until he was assassinated by one of his officers, Pekah, son of Remaliah, who conspired against him with 50 men from Gilead. In verse 25, we read that Pekah entered the citadel of the royal palace at Samaria with Argob and Arieh. With 50 men from Gilead, he assassinated Pekahiah and succeeded him as king. Pekah reigned for 20 years, 752–732 BC, and during his reign, the Assyrian threat intensified. In verse 29 we read, "In the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel, Beth-Maachah, Janoah, Kadesh, and Hazor. He took Gilead and Galilee, including all the land of Naphtali, and deported the people to Assyria." This marked the first large-scale deportation of Israelites to Assyria, a foreshadowing of what was to come. Eventually, Hoshea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah and assassinated him, becoming the last king of Israel. In verse 30 we read, "Hoshea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah, son of Remaliah. He attacked and assassinated him and then succeeded him as king." Hoshea reigned for 9 years, 732–723 BC, and it was during his reign that the northern kingdom met its final disaster. Hoshea's reign marked the end of the kingdom of Israel. In chapter 17, verse 3, we read, "Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hoshea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal and had paid him tribute." This vassal relationship with Assyria seemed to offer some protection to the weakened northern kingdom. However, Hoshea made a fatal mistake in trying to free himself from Assyrian domination. Verse 4 reveals his desperate gamble. But the king of Assyria found that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria. Hoshea had sought an alliance with Egypt to help him rebel against Assyria, and had stopped paying the required tribute. Shalmaneser's response was swift and brutal. Still in verse 4 we read, "Therefore the king of Assyria seized him and put him in prison." With the king captured, the path was clear for a full conquest of Israel. Verse 5 describes the beginning of the end. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. Samaria, Israel's heavily fortified capital, held out for 3 long and desperate years. Finally, in verse 6, we witness the tragic end. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. The year was approximately 722 BC, marking the end of the northern kingdom, after more than 200 years as an independent nation. The Assyrians were known for their policy of mass deportation, relocating conquered populations far from their homelands to break resistance and prevent future rebellions. Verse 6 continues with the fate of the exiled Israelites. He settled them in Halah, in Gozan on the Harbor River, and in the towns of the Medes. This practice of forced relocation had a twofold purpose. It weakened the national identity of the conquered peoples and created mixed communities that were easier to control. For the Israelites, it marked the beginning of a diaspora that scattered the 10 northern tribes so thoroughly that they became known as the Lost 10 Tribes of Israel. The biblical narrative does more than just report historical events. It also provides a theological explanation for Israel's fall. In verse 7 begins a long reflection. All this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods. The list of sins continues in the following verses. Idol worship, adopting the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out, building pagan altars in every town, setting up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill, burning incense on all the altars, and engaging in all kinds of wickedness that provoked the Lord to anger, despite his repeated warnings. Perhaps the saddest part is found in verse 14, which summarizes the people's attitude. But they would not listen and were as stiff-necked as their ancestors, who did not trust in the Lord their God. Verse 15 adds, they rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors and the statutes he had warned them to keep. They followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. The climax of this theological indictment comes in verse 18. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left. To repopulate the now empty land, the king of Assyria brought in people from other conquered regions. In verse 24 we read, the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. These foreign settlers brought their own gods and religious practices. When they began to suffer attacks from lions, they interpreted it as a sign that they did not know how to worship the God of the land. The king of Assyria then sent back one of the exiled Israelite priests to teach them how to worship the Lord. However, the result was a syncretistic religion, as we see in verse 33. They worshipped the Lord, but they also served their own gods, in accordance with the customs of the nations from which they had been brought. These mixed peoples, worshipping a mixture of gods, would later become known as the Samaritans, despised by the Jews of the south for their mixed ancestry and syncretic religion. The narrative ends with a somber observation in verses 34 and 41. To this day, they persist in their former practices. They neither worship the Lord nor adhere to the decrees and regulations. Even while these people were worshipping the Lord, they were serving their idols. To this day, their children and grandchildren continue to do as their ancestors did. Thus ended the northern kingdom of Israel. The 10 tribes were scattered among the nations, losing their distinct identity and never returning as a unified people to the promised land. Only the southern kingdom of Judah remained, as the bearer of the divine promise and guardian of the messianic lineage. The fall of Israel stands as a solemn warning about the consequences of persistent unfaithfulness to God. For generations, God had sent prophets to call the people back to the covenant, but they refused to listen. Divine patience, though long, eventually gave way to judgment. The Assyrian conquest was not merely a political or military event. It was the fulfillment of divine warnings dating back to the days of Moses, when he cautioned about the consequences of disobedience, including exile from the promised land. While the northern kingdom was living out its final days, something extraordinary was happening in Judah, the southern kingdom. In 2 Kings chapter 18, we are introduced to a young king who would change the course of his people's history. Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years, 2 Kings 18:1-2. Unlike many of his predecessors, Hezekiah chose a completely different path. Verse 3 tells us he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. This simple statement marks a significant turning point in Judah's history. After a string of kings who had done evil in the Lord's sight, a ruler had finally arisen who was determined to walk in the ways of David. Hezekiah wasted no time. As soon as he took the throne, he initiated deep reforms in Judah's worship. In verse 4, we see the extent of these changes. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan. This action was truly remarkable. The bronze serpent had a significant place in Israel's history. Back in the days of Moses, when venomous snakes attacked the people in the wilderness, God instructed Moses to make a bronze serpent and set it on a pole. Whoever looked at it would be healed. It was a legitimate symbol of divine salvation. But now, nearly 700 years later, the object had become an idol. The people had begun to worship the object itself, rather than the God it represented. Hezekiah had the courage to destroy even this historic artifact once he realized it had become a spiritual stumbling block. This reveals his deep resolve to eliminate every form of idolatry, even those with apparent historical or religious justification. Hezekiah's faith was exceptional. In verse 5, the Bible makes a striking statement. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. This high praise places Hezekiah in a unique category, even among Judah's righteous kings. His devotion to God was not just a matter of sentiment, it was expressed in concrete obedience. Verse 6 continues, he held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands the Lord had given Moses. Hezekiah returned to the original source of Israel's faith, the law of Moses. Instead of adhering to corrupted traditions that had developed over time, he sought to re-establish worship according to the divine standards. The result of this faithfulness was God's blessing. In verses 7 and 8 we read, "And the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not submit to him. From watchtower to fortified city, he defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory." This rebellion against Assyria was a bold move. Assyria was the superpower of the time, and few dared to defy its might. But Hezekiah's confidence was not in human strength, it was in God's power. His religious reforms were accompanied by crucial political and military decisions that allowed Judah to recover a measure of independence and national dignity. While Hezekiah was implementing his reforms, a catastrophic event was unfolding nearby: the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. In chapter 18, verse 9, we read, "In the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea son of Elah, king of Israel, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, marched against Samaria and laid siege to it." This event must have had a profound impact on Judah. From the perspective of Jerusalem, witnessing Samaria, the northern kingdom's capital, being besieged by the Assyrians must have caused alarm and deep unease. Verses 10 and 11 continue the narrative. "At the end of 3 years, the Assyrians took it, So Samaria was captured in the 6th year of Hezekiah's reign, which was the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel. The king of Assyria deported the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Hala in Gozan on the Haba River and in the towns of the Medes. As the people of Israel were carried off into exile, the people of Judah witnessed the fulfillment of the prophetic warnings that had been proclaimed for generations. Verse 12 gives the theological reason for this tragedy. This happened because they had not obeyed the Lord their God, but had violated his covenant, all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded. They neither listened to the commands nor carried them out. For Hezekiah and the people of Judah, the fall of Samaria served as a powerful object lesson. The destruction of their northern kin confirmed the consequences of disobedience and idolatry. As the people of Israel marched into exile, Judah faced a clear choice: follow the same rebellious path or learn from their brother's failure. The contrast between the two kingdoms became increasingly stark. While Israel, under Hoshea's reign, reaped the consequences of generations of rebellion, Judah, under Hezekiah's leadership, was experiencing a time of spiritual renewal and reform. Hezekiah seized this critical moment to further strengthen his religious reforms. The devastation of the northern kingdom underscored the urgency and importance of purging idolatry and restoring true worship in Judah. For the people witnessing their neighbors being led into captivity, the link between obedience to God and national survival became painfully clear. Despite his religious reforms, Hezekiah knew the Assyrian threat still loomed. Assyria had just conquered the northern kingdom and would soon turn its attention to Judah. In verse 13, we see this threat become reality. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Before this attack, Hezekiah had taken practical steps to strengthen Jerusalem. Although the book of 2 Kings doesn't detail all these preparations, we know from 2 Chronicles and archaeological discoveries that Hezekiah reinforced Jerusalem's walls and carried out a remarkable engineering project to secure the city's water supply in case of a siege. One of Hezekiah's most impressive achievements was the construction of the tunnel that now bears his name. This tunnel, carved through solid rock, redirected water from the Gihon spring into the city walls, all the way to the Pool of Siloam. At 533 meters, about 1,150 feet in length, it's a masterpiece of ancient engineering, especially considering it was dug from both ends and met in the middle. An inscription found inside, known as the Siloam inscription, describes the emotional moment when the two teams of diggers finally met. The workers heard each other's voices and dug toward the sound until their picks broke through. This tunnel ensured that Jerusalem would have access to fresh water even during a prolonged siege, a vital preparation for the war to come. In addition to physical preparations, Hezekiah also sought political alliances. In chapter 18, verse 21, we see a reference to his alliance with Egypt, when the Assyrian official mocks him. "What are you basing this confidence of yours on? You say you have counsel and might for war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending that you rebel against me? Look, you are depending on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff, which pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it." This alliance with Egypt was part of Hezekiah's strategy to resist Assyria. He knew that Judah alone didn't have the military strength to stand against the powerful Assyrian army, so he sought support from the other major regional power. This diplomatic move reflects Hezekiah's political acumen. He used every available means: religious reform, military preparation, and international alliances to protect his people. Yet these preparations weren't enough to prevent the Assyrian invasion. When Sennacherib attacked, he quickly captured most of Judah's territory. In verse 14, we see Hezekiah attempt a diplomatic solution. So Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent this message to the king of Assyria at Lachish. I have done wrong. Withdraw from me, and I will pay whatever you demand of me. The king of Assyria exacted from Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. To pay this enormous tribute, Hezekiah had to use all available resources. Verses 15 and 16 state, So Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace. At this time, Hezekiah stripped off the gold with which he had covered the doors and doorposts of the temple of the Lord, and gave it to the king of Assyria. This desperate act shows how serious the Assyrian threat was. Hezekiah was forced to strip the very temple he had purified and restored just to try to appease the invader. But as we'll see next, even this massive payment wasn't enough to remove the danger. Despite the heavy tribute, Sennacherib was not satisfied. He sent 3 high-ranking officials with a large army from Lachish to Jerusalem to demand the city's complete surrender. In verse 17 we read, The king of Assyria sent his supreme commander, his chief officer and his field commander, with a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. They came up to Jerusalem and stopped at the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washerman's field. The choice of location for this confrontation was no accident. The aqueduct of the upper pool was part of the very water system Hezekiah had built to strengthen the city. The Assyrian officials positioned themselves there as a symbolic threat to cut off Jerusalem's water supply, the very project Hezekiah relied on to survive a siege. The Assyrians summoned the king, but Hezekiah did not meet them personally. In verse 18 we read, They called for the king, and Eliakim son of Hilkiah the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and Joah son of Asaph the recorder went out to them. Then the Assyrian field commander began delivering a message, a psychological speech carefully crafted to demoralize Jerusalem's defenders. He spoke loudly in Hebrew, not Aramaic, the diplomatic language of the time, so that everyone on the walls could understand. His goal was clear: to destroy the people's trust in Hezekiah and in God, and thus force a surrender without a prolonged siege. In verses 19 and 20, he directly questions Hezekiah's strategy. The field commander said to them, Tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You say you have counsel and might for war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending that you rebel against me? He then attacks each pillar of Judah's confidence. First the alliance with Egypt, then Hezekiah's religious reforms, and finally the God of Israel himself. In verses 22-25 he says, But if you say to me, we are depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, You must worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Come now, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses, if you can put riders on them. How then can you repulse one officer of the least of my master's officials, even though you are depending on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Furthermore, have I come to attack and destroy this land without the Lord? The Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it. This final argument was particularly disturbing to the listeners. The Assyrian official was suggesting that the very God of Israel had sent the Assyrians to destroy Jerusalem. This was a direct attempt to undermine the people's faith in the God whom Hezekiah had restored as the center of national life. Hezekiah's representatives recognized the danger these words posed to the morale of the people. In verse 26, they plead, Please speak to your servants in Aramaic since we understand it. Don't speak to us in Hebrew in the hearing of the people on the wall. But this request only confirmed to the Assyrian official that his tactic was working. In verse 27 he replied, Was it only to your master and you that my master sent me to say these things, and not to the people sitting on the wall, who, like you, will have to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine?" Then, raising his voice even more, he continued his speech directly to the people on the wall. In verses 28-35, the high-ranking official makes a direct appeal to the people of Jerusalem, urging them not to trust Hezekiah or his God. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you from my hand. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord. Do not listen to Hezekiah. This is what the king of Assyria says: make peace with me and surrender. Then each of you will eat from your own vine and fig tree and drink water from your own cistern until I come and take you to a land like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey. Choose life and not death." This speech was a cunning mixture of intimidation, false promises, and attempts to undermine religious faith. It was a classic example of psychological warfare aimed at defeating Jerusalem not through military force, but through fear and demoralization. The people's response, however, was remarkable. In verse 36 we read, "But the people remained silent and said nothing in reply, because the king had commanded, 'Do not answer him.'" This silence demonstrated the people's loyalty to Hezekiah and their refusal to give in to Assyrian propaganda. But the challenge had been made, and now Hezekiah and his people faced a crucial decision: to surrender or to resist the seemingly invincible Assyrian war machine. When Hezekiah's officials returned and reported the words of the high-ranking officer, the king reacted with humility and faith. In chapter 19, verse 1, we read, "When King Hezekiah heard this, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and went into the temple of the Lord." Tearing one's clothes and wearing sackcloth were traditional signs of sorrow, mourning, and repentance in Israel. Hezekiah recognized the gravity of the situation and humbled himself before God. He didn't rely on his own strategies or the political alliances he had made. He sought help in the temple, the same temple he had restored as the center of true worship in Judah. Hezekiah also sent an official delegation to the prophet Isaiah. In verse 2 we read, "He sent Eliakim the palace administrator, Shebna the secretary, and the leading priests, all wearing sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah son of Amoz." The fact that they were all wearing sackcloth showed that all of Judah's leadership shared the same spirit of humility and desperation. The message Hezekiah sent to Isaiah reveals both his distress and his hope. In verses 3-4 he says, "This is what Hezekiah says: This day is a day of distress, rebuke, and disgrace, as when children come to the moment of birth, and there is no strength to deliver them. It may be that the Lord your God will hear all the words of the field commander, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to ridicule the living God, and that he will rebuke him for the words the Lord your God has heard. Therefore pray for the remnant that still survives." Hezekiah acknowledged that the situation was desperate. They were like a woman in labor, with no strength to deliver the child. But he also expressed hope that God would hear the Assyrian blasphemies and act to defend his own honor. His main concern wasn't for himself, but for the remnant that still survives, the few in Judah who had not yet fallen under Assyrian rule. Isaiah's response was swift and reassuring. In verses 5-7 we read, "When King Hezekiah's officials came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, 'Tell your master, this is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid of what you have heard, those words with which the underlings of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Listen, I am going to put such a spirit in him that when he hears a certain report, he will return to his own country, and there I will have him cut down with the sword.'" This divine promise must have brought enormous relief to Hezekiah. God had heard his prayer and responded through the prophet, assuring him that the Assyrians would not succeed and that Sennacherib himself would meet a violent end. Meanwhile, the situation on the battlefield was evolving. The Assyrian commander returned to Sennacherib and found him fighting against the city of Libnah, having left Lachish. News arrived that Tirhakah, king of Cush, Ethiopia, was marching out to engage the Assyrians. This military movement forced Sennacherib to reconsider his campaign in Judah. But before withdrawing, Sennacherib sent messengers with letters to Hezekiah, renewing his threats. In verses 10 to 13, he writes, "Do not let the God you depend on deceive you when he says, 'Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria.' Surely you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the countries, destroying them completely. And will you be delivered? Did the gods of the nations destroyed by my predecessors deliver them, gods of Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, or the king of Arpad? Where are the kings of Blair, Sepharvaim, Hena, and Iva?" This letter represented yet another direct challenge, not only to Hezekiah, but to the very God of Israel. Sennacherib placed the God of Israel in the same category as the powerless gods of the nations already conquered, suggesting he too would be unable to save Jerusalem. Hezekiah's response was exemplary. In verse 14, we read, "Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord." This symbolic act demonstrated Hezekiah's total dependence on God. He literally laid the problem before the Lord. Then Hezekiah offered one of the most beautiful and theologically profound prayers in the Bible. In verses 15 to 19 he prayed, and Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, "Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to the words Sennacherib has sent to ridicule the living God. It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste these nations and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone." Lord our God, this prayer reveals Hezekiah's mature faith. He acknowledged the true nature of God as the sole creator and Lord over all the earth. He admitted the reality of the Assyrian conquests, and even agreed that the other gods couldn't save their nations, but he clarified that it was because they were not true gods, only idols made by human hands. The answer to Hezekiah's prayer came swiftly through the prophet Isaiah. In verse 20 we read, "Then Isaiah son of Amoz sent a message to Hezekiah. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I have heard your prayer concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria." Isaiah then delivered a lengthy divine message in which God mocked Sennacherib's arrogance and affirmed his sovereignty over all nations, including Assyria. In verses 21 to 28, God speaks of Jerusalem, personified as the daughter of Zion, mocking Sennacherib. "Who is it you have ridiculed and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes in pride? Against the Holy One of Israel?" God confronts Sennacherib's pride. He boasted of his military conquests as though they were achieved by his own power alone. But in verses 25 and 26, the Lord declares, "Have you not heard? Long ago I ordained it. In days of old I planned it. Now I have brought it to pass. Their people, drained of power, are dismayed and put to shame. They are like plants in the field, like tender green shoots, like grass sprouting on the roof, scorched before it grows up." God makes it clear to the Assyrian king that all his victories occurred only because God allowed them. Sennacherib was merely an instrument in the hands of the divine, used to fulfill greater purposes. Then, in verses 29 to 31, God gives a sign to Hezekiah and the people of Judah. That year they would eat what grew by itself, and in the second year what sprang from that. Only in the third year would they sow and reap, plant vineyards, and eat their fruit. This sign promised not just immediate survival, but the eventual restoration of normal life, when the people would once again work their land in peace. The divine promise concludes in verses 32 to 34 with a specific guarantee of Jerusalem's deliverance. Therefore, this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will defend this city and save it, for my sake and for the sake of David my servant. The promise was clear and decisive. Jerusalem would be spared. Not a single Assyrian soldier would enter the city. No arrow would be shot, no siege ramp would be built. God would protect Jerusalem, not because of the people's merit, but to uphold his own honor and fulfill his promise to David. Then came the miraculous fulfillment of that promise. In verse 35, we read, "That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies." This extraordinary event completely changed the situation. In a single night, without any battle, the mighty Assyrian army was decimated. 185,000 soldiers died, not by human swords, but by the angel of the Lord, an invisible agent of divine judgment. Some theories suggest a plague or disease may have spread quickly through the camp, but the biblical text clearly attributes the event to God's direct intervention. Sennacherib's response was immediate. In verse 36 we read, "So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. The great conqueror, who had subdued so many nations and boasted of his power, was forced to retreat in humiliation without ever having captured Jerusalem. Sennacherib's end was as tragic as his defeat before Jerusalem." Verse 37 tells us, "One day, while he was worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons Adramelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon his son succeeded him as king. His death at the hands of his own sons fulfilled Isaiah's earlier prophecy. I will put a spirit in him. He will return to his own country, and there I will have him cut down with the sword." 2 Kings 19:7. The powerful king who had threatened so many nations did not die in glorious battle, but was treacherously assassinated while worshipping his false god. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem remained in the memory of Judah's people for generations. This divine intervention showed God's care for those who trust in him, and the futility of relying on human strength, no matter how powerful it may seem. Shortly after the victory over Assyria, a new crisis arose, this time affecting King Hezekiah personally. In chapter 20, verse 1, we read, "In those days Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, went to him and said, 'This is what the Lord says, put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover.'" This news must have been devastating for Hezekiah. He had just experienced a major spiritual and military victory, leading his people through one of the most critical crises in their history. Now, at the height of his leadership, he was told he was about to die. Hezekiah's response was immediate and emotional. In verse 2, we read that Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. This posture reflects both his privacy and the intensity with which he sought God. His prayer was brief but sincere. "Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion, and have done what is good in your eyes." Verse 3. After this, Hezekiah wept bitterly. The king's prayer touched God's heart. Before Isaiah had even left the central courtyard of the palace, the Lord instructed him to return with a new message. In verses 5 and 6, God said, "Go back and tell Hezekiah, the ruler of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David, says. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you. On the third day from now, you will go up to the temple of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David." This response shows God's compassion and his willingness to hear sincere prayers. He didn't just promise healing, but a specific extension of life, 15 more years, and continued protection of Jerusalem from Assyria. To confirm this promise, God offered a miraculous sign. Isaiah asked Hezekiah, "What shall be the sign? That the Lord will heal you? Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps, or shall it go back 10 steps?" Verse 9. This likely referred to some kind of sundial or staircase that measured time by the position of a shadow. Hezekiah replied, "It's a simple matter for the shadow to go forward 10 steps. Rather have it go back 10 steps. His choice reflected wisdom, as it would be far more remarkable to see time literally go backward than forward, which happens naturally as the day progresses. In verse 11, we see this miraculous sign fulfilled. Then the prophet Isaiah called on the Lord, and the Lord made the shadow go back the 10 steps it had gone down on the stairway of Ahaz. This extraordinary miracle confirmed God's promise and strengthened Hezekiah's faith in his recovery. The specific method of healing is also mentioned. In verse 7, Isaiah said, "Prepare a poultice of figs." When they did and applied it to the boil, Hezekiah recovered. It's interesting to note that God used a natural remedy, the fig poultice, together with his supernatural intervention. Both medicine and miracle had a role in the healing process. This episode in Hezekiah's life reveals several important spiritual truths: God's willingness to hear sincere prayer, the possibility that his decrees can be altered in response to such prayer, and his compassion for those who serve him faithfully. It also highlights Hezekiah's humility. Though a powerful king, he did not hesitate to cry out to God in his distress. The news of Hezekiah's illness and miraculous recovery spread beyond the borders of Judah. In verse 12 we read, "At that time Marduk-Baladan, son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a gift to Hezekiah because he had heard of Hezekiah's illness and recovery." This diplomatic contact from Babylon was significant for several reasons. Babylon was not yet the superpower it would later become, but it was already a major force in Middle Eastern politics. At that time, Babylon was trying to strengthen its position against Assyria by seeking potential allies who shared its interest in weakening Assyrian power. For Hezekiah, receiving this delegation must have been deeply gratifying. After years of being threatened and humiliated by Assyria, he was now recognized and courted by another important power. It was a sign that his standing in the international arena had improved significantly. Unfortunately, Hezekiah failed to discern the true motives behind this diplomatic mission. The Babylonian envoys were likely more interested in assessing Judah's wealth and military resources than expressing sympathy over the king's recovery. Naively, Hezekiah gave them full access to his kingdom. In verse 13, we read, "Hezekiah received the envoys and showed them all that was in his storehouses, the silver, the gold, the spices, and the fine olive oil, his armory and everything found among his treasures. There was nothing in his palace or in all his kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them." This was a serious diplomatic blunder. By revealing all his resources, Hezekiah exposed both his wealth and his potential military vulnerabilities. In a world where information was power, He was handing strategic advantages to a kingdom that would later become a mortal enemy of Judah. The prophet Isaiah quickly recognized the mistake and came to question the king. In verse 14 he asked, "What did those men say, and where did they come from?" Hezekiah replied, "They came from a distant land, from Babylon." Then Isaiah asked, "What did they see in your palace?" And Hezekiah admitted, "They saw everything in my palace. There is nothing among my treasures that I did not show them." Isaiah's response was solemn and prophetic. In verses 16 to 18, he said, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord, and some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." This prophecy was both tragic and far-reaching. The treasure that Hezekiah had so proudly displayed to the Babylonians would one day be taken away by those very same Babylonians. And the royal sons of Judah would not reign as kings in Jerusalem, but serve as eunuchs in the Babylonian court. Hezekiah's response in verse 19 is surprising and has been interpreted in various ways. "The word of the Lord you have spoken is good," Hezekiah replied, for he thought, "Will there not be peace and security in my lifetime?" Some view this response as callous selfishness, Hezekiah caring little for what would happen after his death, so long as he could enjoy peace during his own life. Others interpret his words as a humble acceptance of divine judgment, acknowledging that the sentence could have been far worse and might have fallen on him personally. Whatever the correct interpretation, it is clear that Hezekiah accepted the prophetic word without protest. This final episode reveals an important facet of human nature. Even the best leaders are prone to lapses in judgment. Hezekiah, who had demonstrated great faith and courage in the face of the Assyrian threat, now appeared naive and perhaps even prideful in the face of Babylonian flattery. The Bible presents its heroes in full view without hiding their flaws, reminding us that even the great men and women of faith are in the end still human. Isaiah's prophecy of the Babylonian captivity would begin to be fulfilled about a century later, when Nebuchadnezzar took the first captives from Judah to Babylon. Among them was Daniel and his friends, young men of royal lineage who served in the Babylonian court, just as Isaiah had foretold. When Hezekiah died, after completing the 15 additional years that God had granted him, his son Manasseh ascended the throne. Unfortunately, Manasseh did not follow in his father's footsteps. He reversed many of Hezekiah's religious reforms and led Judah back into idolatry, deepening the cycle of revival and regression that marked the kingdom's history. Yet Hezekiah's reign remains one of the high points in Judah's story, a time of spiritual renewal, political independence, and divine protection that showed what was possible when a king and his people wholeheartedly chose to walk in the ways of the Lord. After the faithful king Hezekiah's death, his son Manasseh took the throne of Judah. In 2 Kings 21, we see that he was very young when he began to reign. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. 2 Kings 21:1. This long reign of over half a century would be marked by a dreadful reversal of the reforms his father had made. Unlike Hezekiah, who had served God with all his heart, Manasseh chose an entirely different path. Verse 2 leaves no doubt about his conduct. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Manasseh not only ignored his father's good example, he actively worked to undo everything Hezekiah had accomplished. verse 3, describes his actions. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He also erected altars to Baal and made an Asherah pole, as Ahab king of Israel had done. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. But the young king didn't stop at building pagan altars in the high places outside the city. He brought idolatry into the sacred temple itself. In verses 4 and 5 we read, "He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, 'In Jerusalem I will put my name.' In the two courts of the temple of the Lord he built altars to all the starry hosts." His religious practices became increasingly extreme and abominable. Verse 6 reveals he sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced divination, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. To complete his desecration of the temple, Manasseh placed an idol in the sanctuary itself. Verse 7 records this sacrilegious act. He took the carved Asherah pole he had made and put it in the temple, of which the Lord had said to David and to his son Solomon, "In this temple and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever." All of these actions represented a complete rejection of the covenant God had made with Israel. Manasseh's idolatry was not just a religious issue. It struck at the very foundations of Judah's national identity as God's chosen people. On top of all this, Manasseh became known for his cruelty. In verse 16, we read, "Moreover, Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end, besides the sin that he had caused Judah to commit, so that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord." The phrase, "shed innocent blood," likely refers to the persecution and execution of God's faithful worshippers, including prophets who opposed his practices. An ancient Jewish tradition, not recorded in the Bible, claims that the prophet Isaiah was killed during this period, sawn in two on Manasseh's orders. God's response to these abominations came through his prophets, whose words are recorded in verses 10-15. The Lord declared that because of Manasseh's sins, he would bring upon Jerusalem and Judah a disaster so severe that it would make the ears of everyone who hears of it tingle. God promised to wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. Manasseh's actions sealed Judah's fate. Even though later kings would try to bring reform, the spiritual damage caused by this long reign of apostasy proved irreversible. Verse 9 summarizes the impact of his influence. Manasseh led them astray, so that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. The book of 2 Kings does not mention Manasseh's repentance, but this part of the story is told in 2 Chronicles. In chapter 33 of that book, we see that the consequences of Manasseh's sins came swiftly. Verse 11 states, "So the Lord brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon." This humiliating capture marked a turning point in Manasseh's life. Taken as a prisoner to Babylon, at the time under Assyrian control, he finally faced the consequences of his rebellion against God. The hooks mentioned in the text likely refer to metal rings inserted into the noses or lips of prisoners, by which they were led with ropes, a typical Assyrian method for humiliating conquered kings. In the depths of his suffering, Manasseh finally turned to the God he had abandoned. Verse 12 describes this change of heart. In his distress, he sought the favor of the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. Surprisingly, the Lord heard his prayer. Verse 13 recounts, "And when he prayed, to him the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God." Restored to his throne in Jerusalem, Manasseh tried to undo some of the harm he had caused. He removed the foreign gods and the idol from the temple, tore down the altars he had built and restored the altar of the Lord, offering fellowship and thanksgiving sacrifices. Verse 16 reports, "Then he restored the altar of the Lord and sacrificed fellowship offerings and thank offerings on it, and told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel." However, despite these late efforts, the spiritual damage had already been done. Verse 17 notes, "The people, however, continued to sacrifice at the high places, but only to the Lord their God." When Manasseh died, his son Amon became king and quickly returned to the path of idolatry. In 2 Kings 21:20-21, we read, "He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done. He followed completely the ways of his father, worshipping the idols his father had worshipped and bowing down to them." Amon's reign was short, only 2 years, before he was assassinated by his own officials. Manasseh's repentance, though sincere, came too late to change the course he had set for his kingdom. His long reign of wickedness had shaped a generation of idolaters, and the brief reform at the end of his life was not enough to reverse that influence. The story of Manasseh shows that while God is always willing to forgive a repentant sinner, the consequences of our actions often remain. The personal forgiveness Manasseh received did not erase the national judgment his leadership had brought upon Judah. After Amon's brief and wicked reign, his son Josiah ascended to the throne. In 2 Kings 22:1, we read, "Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. This boy, who assumed the throne at such a young age, would become one of Judah's most remarkable religious reformers. Unlike his father and grandfather, Josiah chose to follow the ways of David. Verse 2 says, "He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed completely the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left." In the 18th year of his reign, when Josiah was 26, he initiated a temple renovation that had been neglected during the previous reigns. In verses 3-7, we see that he sent his secretary Shaphan to the temple to oversee the repairs, using the money that had been collected for this purpose. During the restoration work, something extraordinary was discovered. Verse 8 reports, "Hezekiah, the high priest, said to Shaphan the secretary, 'I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord.' He gave it to Shaphan, who read it. This book of the law was likely a copy of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, or at least the book of Deuteronomy. During the long years of apostasy under Manasseh and Amon, God's law had been so neglected that even this foundational document had been lost in the temple. When Shaphan returned to the king, he gave a report on the repairs, and then said, "Hezekiah, the priest, has given me a book." Shaphan read it aloud to the king. Josiah's reaction was dramatic. In verse 11 we read, "When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes." This act of tearing one's clothes was a cultural expression of extreme grief and distress. Josiah was horrified to realize how far his people had strayed from God's commandments. Immediately, the king ordered his officials to inquire of the Lord about what the book meant for them. "Go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all Judah about what is written in this book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that burns against us, because those who have gone before us have not obeyed the words of this book. They have not acted in accordance with all that is written there concerning us." The officials went to consult the prophetess Huldah, who lived in Jerusalem. Her response, recorded in verses 15-17, confirmed Josiah's fears. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on this place and its people, according to everything written in the book the king of Judah has read." However, because of Josiah's humble response, God also sent a personal word of comfort to the king. In verses 19 to 20, the prophetess declared, "Because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before the Lord, I will gather you to your ancestors, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I am going to bring on this place." Strengthened by this prophetic word, Josiah redoubled his reform efforts. In chapter 23, we see that he assembled all the leaders and the people of Judah at the temple, where he read to them the entire book of the covenant. Then he made a covenant before the Lord, committing to follow the Lord and keep his commandments. All the people pledged themselves to the covenant. Josiah then launched a tireless campaign to purify Judah from idolatry. He removed all idolatrous objects from the temple, deposed the pagan priests, tore down the high places, and destroyed altars, Asherah poles, and every symbol of false worship. His reform was the most extensive and profound since the days of David. In verses 24 and 25, we read a powerful summary of his actions. Furthermore, Josiah got rid of the mediums and spiritists, the household gods, the idols, and all the other detestable things seen in Judah and Jerusalem. He did this to fulfill the requirements of the law written in the book that Hilkiah the priest had discovered in the temple of the Lord. Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, in accordance with all the law of Moses. The discovery of the book of the law and Josiah's obedient response marked the last great spiritual revival in Judah before the exile. It was a time of returning to the roots of the faith and renewing the covenant with God. One of Josiah's most remarkable accomplishments was the celebration of an extraordinary Passover, surpassing any held since the time of the judges. In chapter 23, verse 21, we read the king's command. The king gave this order to all the people: "Celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant." This was no ordinary observance. It was a return to the precise observance of the law of Moses. Verses 22 and 23 emphasize the uniqueness of this Passover. Not since the days of the judges who led Israel, nor throughout the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, had any such Passover been observed. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem. What made this Passover so special? In 2 Chronicles 35, we get more details. Josiah personally provided from his own herds 30,000 lambs and young goats for the Passover offerings, along with 3,000 cattle. His officials also gave voluntary contributions of animals for the people, the priests, and the Levites. The priests and Levites prepared themselves ritually, and all the services were conducted in strict accordance with the law of Moses. The Levites slaughtered the Passover lambs, set aside the consecrated portions, and distributed them quickly so that everyone could participate. In 2 Chronicles 35, verse 18, we read again, "The Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah, the priests, the Levites, all Judah and Israel who were there with him, and the people of Jerusalem." The celebration of the Passover was particularly significant because it marked a return to Israel's historical roots. Passover commemorated the deliverance of the people from slavery in Egypt, the founding event of their national identity. By restoring this celebration in all its purity, Josiah was reminding the people of who they truly were, the chosen people of God, rescued from bondage to serve him. This extraordinary Passover also represented a renewal of the covenant between God and his people. By participating in this ancient ritual, the people reaffirmed their commitment to God's commandments and their identity as his special people. The Bible's emphasis that no Passover like this had occurred since the time of the judges, not even during the reigns of David or Solomon, highlights the purity and faithfulness to the law with which it was conducted. Josiah did not improvise or modernize the ritual. He meticulously followed the original instructions given by Moses. Sadly, despite this return to faithfulness under Josiah's leadership, the hearts of the people of Judah were not truly changed. In 2 Kings 23:26-27, we read, "Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah because of all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence as I removed Israel, and I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple about which I said, my name shall be there." Josiah's reform, though sincere and far-reaching, came too late to change the course of Judah's history. God's judgment had already been set. Even so, this extraordinary Passover stands as a powerful testament to what is possible when God's people return to his word with sincerity and obedience. Despite his faithfulness to God, Josiah met a tragic and premature end on the battlefield. In chapter 23, verse 29, we read, "While Josiah was king, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the Euphrates River to help the king of Assyria. King Josiah marched out to meet him in battle, but Necho faced him and killed him at Megiddo." This brief passage conceals a more complex story. The broader historical context was the decline of the Assyrian Empire and the rise of Babylon. The Assyrian king was under attack by the Babylonians, and Pharaoh Necho was marching to assist him. This Egyptian-Assyrian alliance was not in Judah's interest, as the nation had long suffered under Assyrian oppression. Josiah decided to intercept the Egyptian army at Megiddo, a strategically located city in a narrow pass where the Carmel Mountains meet the hills of Galilee. It was a natural choke point on the main route connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia. In 2 Chronicles 35, we get more detail about this fatal encounter. Pharaoh Necho sent messengers to Josiah saying, "What have I to do with you, king of Judah? I'm not coming against you at this time, but against the house with which I am at war. God has told me to hurry, so stop opposing God, who is with me, or he will destroy you." Surprisingly, the text tells us that these words actually came from God, but Josiah did not recognize them. Instead of backing off, he disguised himself and entered the battle, ignoring the divine warning. During the confrontation, Egyptian archers struck King Josiah, and he told his officers, "Take me away. I'm badly wounded." They removed him from his chariot, put him in another, and brought him to Jerusalem, where he died. He was buried in the tombs of his ancestors, and all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for him. The death of Josiah at Megiddo marked a turning point in the history of Judah. With him died the last hope for genuine reform. His son Jehoahaz, who succeeded him, did not follow his righteous ways, and within a few months, Judah fell under Egyptian domination. The prophet Jeremiah composed laments for Josiah, and all the singers, both men and women, continued to speak of Josiah in their lamentations to this day. The untimely death of this faithful king was a national tragedy and a prelude to even greater disasters to come. The irony of this story is that Josiah, who had been so meticulous in following God's law in religious matters, appears to have failed to seek divine guidance in this critical military decision. His choice to oppose Egypt, though politically understandable, went against the specific direction God had given through Pharaoh. His death serves as a sobering reminder that even God's most faithful servants are not immune to lapses in judgment with tragic consequences. After Josiah's death, Judah entered a period of rapid decline under kings who were little more than puppets of foreign powers. The first of these was Jehoahaz, Josiah's son. In 2 Kings 23:31 we read, "Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 3 months. His reign was as short as it was unrighteous, for he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his ancestors." had done. Jehoahaz's control over Judah ended swiftly when Pharaoh Necho captured him and took him to Egypt, where he later died. Verse 33 reports, Pharaoh Necho put him in chains at Riblah in the land of Hamath, so that he might not reign in Jerusalem, and imposed on Judah a levy of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. To replace him, Necho installed another of Josiah's sons on the throne, changing his name from Eliakim to Jehoiakim, a symbolic gesture of Pharaoh's authority over the new king. Verse 35 shows how subservient Jehoiakim was to Egypt. Jehoiakim paid Pharaoh Necho the silver and gold he demanded. In order to do so, he taxed the land and exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land according to their wealth. Jehoiakim reigned for 11 years, and like his brother, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his ancestors had done. During his reign, the regional power structure shifted dramatically. In chapter 24, verse 1, we see Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. But then he changed his mind and rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. This rebellion proved to be a fatal mistake. Nebuchadnezzar sent raiding bands from Babylon, Aram, Moab, and Ammon to destroy Judah, just as the Lord had foretold through his prophets. After Jehoiakim's death, his son Jehoiakim, also called Jeconiah, became king. In verse 8 we read, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 3 months. His short reign coincided with the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. Soon after, he surrendered to Nebuchadnezzar, who took him captive to Babylon along with the queen mother, his officials, and many of Judah's nobles and skilled artisans. The last king of Judah was Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's uncle, whom Nebuchadnezzar placed on the throne as a vassal. Verse 18 says, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 11 years. Like his predecessors, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done. Despite his position as Babylon's vassal, Zedekiah eventually gave in to political pressure to rebel. Verse 20 tells us, it was because of the Lord's anger that all this happened to Jerusalem and Judah, and in the end he thrust them from his presence. Now Zedekiah also rebelled against the king of Babylon. This sequence of puppet kings, Jehoahaz under Egypt, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah under Babylon, demonstrates the degradation of the Davidic monarchy. Once independent rulers who led a nation allied with God, Judah's kings had become mere instruments of foreign powers, powerless to shape their own destiny. Moreover, none of these final kings displayed the faithfulness to God that had characterized Josiah. Rather than learning from the tragedy that befell their kingdom, they persisted in the very sins that had brought about divine judgment. The cycle of idolatry, injustice, and rebellion against God, which had marked much of the monarchy's history, continued to the bitter end. The fall of Jerusalem didn't happen all at once, but in 3 distinct stages or waves, each more devastating than the last. This gradual process gave the people multiple opportunities to repent, opportunities they sadly ignored. The first stage occurred during Jehoiakim's reign, around 605 BC. Although 2 Kings doesn't provide many details about this event, we know from Jeremiah and Daniel that during this initial campaign, Nebuchadnezzar took some of the temple treasures and a select group of young men from the Jewish nobility to Babylon, including Daniel and his friends. The second and more severe stage came in 597 BC during Jehoiakim's brief reign. In chapter 24, verses 10 to 16, we read that Nebuchadnezzar personally came to Jerusalem and Jehoiakim surrendered. The king of Babylon carried off all the treasures of the temple of the Lord and of the royal palace. As the Lord had declared, Nebuchadnezzar removed all the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. In addition to the material treasures, Nebuchadnezzar deported the elite of Jewish society. He carried into exile all Jerusalem, all the officers and fighting men, and all the skilled workers and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people of the land were left. King Jehoiakim, the queen mother, his wives, his officials, and the leading men of the land were all taken captive from Judah to Babylon. Also taken were 7,000 soldiers and 1,000 craftsmen and artisans, all strong and capable for war. This mass deportation left Judah critically weakened, deprived of leadership and technical skills. The only ones left were the poorest people of the land, who were scarcely able to mount any meaningful resistance. The third and most devastating stage took place in 586 BC after Zedekiah's rebellion. In chapter 25, we read that Nebuchadnezzar returned with his entire army and laid siege to Jerusalem. In verse 1, the text gives us the exact date. So in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, a king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. He encamped outside the city and built siege ramps all around it. The siege was long and terrible. In verses 2 and 3 we read, "The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat." This means the siege lasted roughly a year and a half, during which the hunger inside the city became unbearable. Eventually, the city fell. A breach was made in the wall, and all the soldiers fled by night through the gate between the two walls near the king's garden, even though the city was surrounded by the Babylonians. They fled toward the Arabah, but the Babylonian army pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his soldiers deserted him. Zedekiah's punishment was brutal. In chapter 25, verse 7, we see the horrifying fate of Judah's last king. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then they put out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. This punishment was typical of Babylonian cruelty, calculated and deliberate. Forcing Zedekiah to witness the execution of his sons ensured that his last sight would be the most horrifying imaginable. Then, by blinding him, the Babylonians ensured that this nightmare would be seared permanently into his memory, never to be replaced by any new image. With the king captured, all organized resistance came to an end, and the Babylonians were free to complete Jerusalem's destruction. In verse 8 we read, "On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard and official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan oversaw the complete destruction of the city." In verses 9 and 10, we see the extent of the devastation. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. This was a moment of indescribable tragedy for the people of Judah. The temple built by Solomon, the center of worship for nearly 400 years, was completely destroyed. The royal palace, symbol of the Davidic dynasty, was reduced to ashes. The walls that once protected the city were torn down, leaving it permanently vulnerable. After that, Nebuzaradan deported the remaining population. He carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with those who had gone over to the king of Babylon and the rest of the population. Only the poorest were left behind to work the land as farmers and vine dressers. The Babylonians also took all the remaining valuables from the temple, the bronze pillars, the movable stands, and the large bronze basin that had been in the temple. They also took away the utensils used in temple service, bowls, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles. Verse 15 adds, "The commander of the guard also took away the censers and sprinkling bowls, everything made of pure, gold or silver. The weight of the bronze from the 2 pillars, the basin, and the movable stands that Solomon had made for the temple of the Lord was so great it could not be weighed. Each pillar was about 8.5 meters tall, and its capital was decorated with a network of interwoven chains and pomegranates, all of bronze. The second pillar was identical to the first. The Babylonians also executed the remaining leaders of Judah. Nebuzaradan arrested Sariah the chief priest, Zephaniah the second priest, and the 3 doorkeepers. He also seized the army officer in charge of the men of war, 5 royal advisors, the chief officer who had been in charge of conscripting the people, and 60 men still in the city. They were all taken to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where they were executed. Thus, verses 20 and 21 solemnly conclude this section. So Judah went into captivity, away from her land. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, to be over the people he had left behind in Judah. These 3 waves of invasion and deportation fulfilled the prophecies that God had long spoken through his prophets. The great nation established by David and strengthened by Solomon had come to its earthly end. The temple was destroyed, the royal lineage was broken, and the people were scattered. God's covenant with David appeared to be in crisis, and many wondered if his promises had failed. After the destruction of Jerusalem and the deportation of most of its inhabitants, only a small remnant of the poorest people remained in the land. Over them, Nebuchadnezzar appointed Gedaliah, a Jew from a noble family who apparently had supported surrendering to the Babylonians. In chapter 25, verse 22, we read about his appointment. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, to be over the people he had left behind in Judah. Gedaliah set up his headquarters in Mizpah, a town a few kilometers north of Jerusalem. He adopted a conciliatory policy and encouraged the people to submit to Babylonian rule. In verse 24, we see his advice to the Jews. Gedaliah took an oath to reassure them and their men. "Do not be afraid of the Babylonian officials," he said. "Settle down in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will go well with you." For a brief moment, it seemed a minimal degree of stability might return to devastated Judah. Many Jews who had fled to neighboring lands during the war began to return. In verse 23, we read, "When all the army officers and their men heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah as governor, they came to him at Mizpah, including Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, Johanan, son of Kareah, Sariah, son of Tanhumeth, from Netopha, and Jazaniah, the son of the Maacathite, along with their men." This period of peace, however, was short-lived. In the 7th month, Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah and a member of the royal family, came with 10 men and assassinated Gedaliah. Verse 25 describes this act of betrayal. But in the 7th month, Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, the son of Elisha, who was of royal blood, came with 10 men and struck down Gedaliah, along with the Jews and the Babylonians who were with him. At Mizpah, this assassination was likely driven by nationalist resentment against Gedaliah's policy of collaboration, or perhaps by Ishmael's personal ambition to restore the Davidic monarchy. Whatever the motive, the result was disastrous for the remnant left in Judah. Verse 26 shows the immediate consequence. At this, all the people, from the least to the greatest, together with the army officers, fled to Egypt for fear of the Babylonians. This flight to Egypt symbolized a return to the very slavery their ancestors had escaped under Moses' leadership. Now the cycle had come full circle. The people who had been delivered from Egypt to worship God in the Promised Land were now fleeing that land back to Egypt. The prophet Jeremiah, who was still alive at this time, strongly opposed this move to Egypt. He warned the people that they should remain in the land and submit to Babylonian rule as God had commanded. But the people did not listen to the voice of the prophet. Instead, they forced Jeremiah himself to go with them to Egypt, where, according to tradition, he was eventually martyred. With this flight to Egypt, the story of Judah as an independent, political entity came to an end. The land promised to Abraham, conquered by Joshua, unified by David, and glorified by Solomon, was now nearly desolate, its cities in ruins and its temple destroyed. Yet, the book of 2 Kings ends with a glimmer of hope. In verses 27 to 30, we read of an act of mercy toward the captive king Jehoiakim. In the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the year Evil-Merodach became king of Babylon, he released Jehoiakim from prison on the 27th day of the 12th month. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat of honor higher than those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim put aside his prison clothes and for the rest of his life ate regularly at the king's table. Day by day, for the rest of his life, the king gave Jehoiakim a regular allowance. This final note, though seemingly small, carried great theological and historical weight. Jehoiakim was a direct descendant of David, and his release from prison and restoration to a position of honor kept alive the hope that the Davidic line and the divine promises tied to it had not ended permanently. For God's people in exile, this news served as a reminder that even in the midst of severe judgment, God had not completely rejected his people or his promises. The Davidic dynasty still existed, even if only as a king without a throne in a foreign court. And in fact, it would be through this very Davidic line, traced from Jehoiakim, that the Messiah would eventually come, fulfilling the ancient promise made to David that his throne would be established forever. So, even in the ashes of the kingdom of Judah, the first signs of hope and renewal could already be seen. The time of judgment would be long, 70 years of exile, as the prophet Jeremiah had predicted, but it would not be the end of God's story with his people. What an incredible journey we've just taken together through the book of 2 Kings. We've seen faithful and unfaithful kings, powerful prophets, astounding miracles, and finally, the fall of a kingdom that had strayed from its purpose. This story isn't just a historical account, it speaks directly to us today. We've seen how leaders who trusted God found guidance and protection, while those who followed their own ways faced devastating consequences. We've seen God's patience, sending prophet after prophet, giving chance after chance before judgment finally came. And even in the darkest moment, when Jerusalem was in ruins and the people were scattered, we saw that small ray of hope. A descendant of David freed from prison, keeping alive the promise that God had not abandoned his plan. If you enjoyed this journey through the book of 2 Kings, I want to invite you to become part of our community. Click the subscribe button now so you won't miss our upcoming biblical explorations. Each week, we dive into a new story from Scripture, discovering the hidden treasures in God's Word together. And if this message touched your heart, please share this video with friends and family. Who knows how many people need to hear this very word today? Your share could be the tool God uses to bring hope to someone in need. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'll see you in the next video for another amazing adventure through the pages of the Bible.